Okay. Oh, Jane, I'm going to lift this up and you'll pull it back down. Okay, all right. Yes. Good evening, everyone. I'm Eve Kahn. I'm head of the Grow Your Club Special Functions Committee, which means I have the thrill and privilege of going through all the forthcoming books that are listed on a site called Edelweiss and looking for books about books that suit the podium of this unique hybrid clubhouse, library, and museum founded in the 1880s with free galleries and free public programs. And sometimes I'm leafing through, I'm just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and I see something amazing. Oh my gosh, someone's done a book about the history of Yizkor books, the memorial books for vanished Jewish communities. And I think to myself, I'm just going to email Jane Ziegelman out of the blue and see if she'll come grace the podium at our unique institution. And she agreed. So I'm so, so thrilled. Keep an eye on our amazing upcoming exhibitions and programs. We have great stuff coming up this spring for free related to the history of Black librarians in America, Jack Kerouac, pioneers of early 20th century Irish literature, avant-garde mid-20th century bookstores in Mexico, and the print culture of Jessica Mitford and her complicated sisters, as well as LGBTQ archives and ephemera. The world's great experts in the history of the printed word and image, how we communicate across time and space, come to grace this podium. And so now tonight's star, Jane Ziegelman, whose fascinating new book, Once There Was a Town, The Memory Books of a Lost Jewish World, we have for sale and for signing at our wonderful back table this evening that we are celebrating this evening. Jane is also the author of 97 Orchard, an edible history of 5 immigrant families in one New York tenement, which grew out of her longtime association with the Lower East Side Tenement Museum, where she was a curator. And with her husband, Andrew Coe, who's here this evening, she wrote the James Beard Award-winning A Square Meal, a culinary history of the Great Depression. Jane, I'm so thrilled that you answered my completely out of the blue emails and calls and agreed to come grace this podium. Thank you for all you do for the field, and I can't wait to hear about your discoveries. Welcome, 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 Jane.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to see you all. Now, to Yizkor books. For more, let's see, is this good? Yeah? Okay. For more than 2,000 years, the Jewish response to catastrophe has been to write about it. Starting with the Old Testament, the Book of Lamentations, which is in the Old Testament, describes war-ravaged Jerusalem in the days after the destruction of the temple, or in Hebrew, what's called the Hurban. An important word. The Hurban is the event that began the Jewish exile, and it's the event that's considered the seminal tragedy in Jewish history. Jump ahead to medieval Europe, and you have Memorbucher, records of the anti-Semitic killing sprees that took place in Germany during the Crusades. Yeah. A little closer. Is this like good? Okay. In our own time, in the decades after the Holocaust, Jews wrote Yizkor books, over 1,000 in total, each book devoted to a different fallen community. The word Yizkor. The word Yizkor is a form of the Hebrew verb to remember. Literally translated, it means may he remember. Yizkor is the first word of a memorial prayer in which we ask God, may God remember the souls of our departed relatives. However, Yizkor can also mean remembrance. A Yizkor book is a book of remembrance. Unflinchingly and in plain language, Yizkor book writers document the Nazi war crimes that wiped out whole towns, many perpetrated in the towns themselves, others in the forests where Jews were hunted like animals, and more in the death camps. These testimonials, and I've read many of them, make for very difficult reading. However, they make up only a fraction of what constitutes a Yizkor book. The balance and the greater part documents what life was like in these towns before 1939. On the eve of World War II, roughly half of East European Jewry lived in small towns, or in Yiddish, shtetls. At one time, there were thousands of these towns, the bedrock of what Cynthia Ozick once described as a luminous civilization. By the end of the war, there were none. Yizkor books were written to preserve in memory the world that Hitler had erased. What's considered the first modern Yizkor book was published in 1924, so before the Holocaust, which is interesting. It was written to memorialize a pogrom that took place in a town of Proskorov in Western Ukraine. And in the Proskorov book, you'll find themes and iconography that will come up again in future Yizkor books. Most importantly is the idea that a book can be a tombstone, which is what this image conveys. The word, the large word at the top, you might recognize is Yizkor. And then under that, it reads Horban, Proskorov. So this is another Horban. It's language that connects this recent tragedy to the original tragedy. And you'll see those same connections made in later Yizkor books through both words and images. Something else you'll find in the Proskorov book is fire imagery. Another one of those pervasive Yizkor book motifs. Many Yizkor books contain illustrations of candles, burning candles, a reference to the yahrzeit or memorial candles that Jews burn on the anniversary of a death. This candle illustration is not from the Proskorov book. It's from a Yizkor book that was written in 1951 from a town called Belchetov. And I wanted to show it to you because you will see many images like this in the future, in future Yizkor books. So we've learned already a book can be a tombstone and a book can be a candle. This illustration, which is from the Proskorov book, another kind of fire image, is a little different. Here, the candles have been extinguished, a death metaphor that also shows up in many future Yizkor books, along with other kinds of fire images, which we'll see more of in a few minutes. The Yizkor books I describe in Once There Was a Town were written mainly in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. They were privately published in small printings, under 1,000, maybe 200 to 300, and then distributed to former shtetl residents. Yizkor books are often referred to as memorial books, but I think of them more as memory books or memory anthologies, collections of essays, stories, memoirs, poems, and testimonials about individual towns, their history, culture, and destruction. Key players in the making of these books were organizations that had formed decades before the Holocaust, starting in the late 19th century in cities like New York, in other words, immigrant cities. Jews from the same towns, and in Yiddish, that Jews from the same towns, the word is Landsman, so I'll be using that word, Landsman. They banded together to form mutual aid societies called Landsmannschaft. So, if someone in the family was sick and couldn't work, these mutual aid societies, provided financial support. And when a family member died, they ensured a plot in a Jewish cemetery. As time went on and immigrants moved up in the world, Landsmannschaften, that's the plural, Landsmannschaften, became important social hubs, hosting banquets and fundraisers for landsmen back in the old country. And after the war, it was these societies that assumed responsibility for writing the town Yizkor book. This is a photo that I really love. It is a Landsmannschaft banquet. It was held in 1950, so we can assume that there were survivors in this crowd. But you can see it's a pretty upscale event. This is their cooperation, however, was uneven at best. One of the idiosyncrasies of Yizkor books is how much they tell us about their own creation. A lot of that information is up at the front of the book in prefaces or notes from the editors. So, something we learn, for example, is that the process of writing a Yizkor book was long and contentious. Disagreements started with whether a Yizkor book should be written at all. Those opposed voiced two main objections. One, the emotional toll of writing a Yizkor book. The thought of it was just too much. And two, the belief that it was time to stop crying about the war and start looking to the future. Those in favor, however, saw the creation of a Yizkor book as a life's mission. They coaxed and pressured their landsmen, pointing out that other towns already had Yizkor books, and that not having one was a pitiful reflection on their own community. Eventually, they prevailed in many cases. In many cases, they didn't. But these campaigns, these persuasion campaigns, sometimes went on for years and even decades. So these books had a rough takeoff. Another point of contention: what language should the book be written in? Yiddish, the mother tongue of Eastern European Jewry, or Hebrew, the language of the new Jewish state? One way to resolve this debate was to permit both. As a result, Yizkor books often have two sections, one in Yiddish, one in Hebrew, along with a short English section. We also learn from these introductions that Yizkor book writers were plagued by feelings of insecurity. The shtetl had its intelligentsia. These were people qualified to write a Yizkor book. However, they had been some of Hitler's first victims. Very few had survived the war. So regular Jews, ordinary Jews, were the only Jews left. Their lack of credentials was a source of terrible self-consciousness, so much so that many Yizkor books open with apologies. Here's an example. It's from a Yizkor book published in 1957 for a shtetl called Bolitchow. And this is how it goes. Honorable reader, we ask your forgiveness for the material that is lacking in the historical section after the year 1900. To our great dismay, we were missing oral and written sources. The chapters on experiences and folklore are not the fruits of the pen of professional, experienced writers. Rather, these are solely collections of memories and experiences, a slice of life in our city, of its people, happenings, struggles, desires, and aspirations. The Yiddish translation in the book is not uniform for two reasons. One, the translation was not done by one person. And two, we wished to speak to the reader in simple Bolotchov language, which is also interesting. So there was an element of shame, but there was also an attempt not to be too highfalutin, but to speak in the language of everyday life. And then continuing now with the apology, despite its many gaps, may this book serve as a modest comfort for the natives of our town and our friends. Would it be that every person can find in it an echo of what was lost, and is no more. As I was working on Once There Was a Town, a question that many people asked was, is a Yizkor book an actual book? Yes, the answer is most Yizkor books are what we would consider a regular book. They are hardcover books, typeset, many of them large format, their titles embossed in gold letters. In other words, these are books with a sense of importance and permanence, intended to serve as family heirlooms. What we're looking at in this shot are the Yizkor books behind the desk in the Dorot room at the New York Public Library, which is the Jewish division. And what's interesting is that they keep them handy. They're not in the stacks because right now they're getting requested a lot by people who are mostly doing genealogical research. So, and these are books, most of these books have been translated. Most of the books that we're looking at here are in English. Many Yizkor books are illustrated, sometimes lavishly, with both photographs and original art. What you're looking at here is a drawing called My Shtetl is Burning, an image that again harkens back to the Churban, the destruction of the temple, which was also consumed by fire. This image it was published in 1975, so relatively late. And if it looks like the book has two covers, it's because it does. It has one cover for readers of Hebrew Yiddish who read right to left, and then you flip it over and it opens for English readers because the book does provide a very short English essay. But for their benefit, the book does open in two directions. Now, it happens that I'm particularly familiar with this Lubamel book because Lubamel is the place my family is from and where my father was born. It's a place I've been hearing stories about since I was a young kid, and ultimately, it's the place that led me to write a book about Yizkor books. The first thing you see when you open the Lubamel Yizkor book is a map. This is no ordinary map, but a map drawn from memory by a former town resident. It's what's called a memory map, and many Yizkor books have them. Bear in mind that at the time this map was created, essentially nothing that you see in it existed, was still standing. Lubamel had been occupied twice, first by the Russians and then by the Germans, and by the time that was over, just about every structure that had any kind of connection with Jewish life had been destroyed. Buildings had been burnt or incinerated, the cemetery had been uprooted, the tombstones used as paving stones. On this map, however, Jewish Lubamel is conjured back into existence, a feat of imagination representative of the entire Yizkor book enterprise. For anyone new to the world of Yizkor books, these memory maps offer a shorthand introduction to its main institutions. There's the synagogue, the study house, the public bathhouse, which you needed in a town that had no plumbing system, the central marketplace, and the cemetery. A curious feature of this map is that only one of the town's businesses is represented by name. And I don't know if you can make that out, but can you make it out? Okay, so it's a is it Sobel Mechanical Works? Okay, so here's my question. Why? Why would this one business get a name? And do you have any theories? Again, please? He was the biggest employer of the town. That's a very good guess, but no. It is because Nathan Sobel was one of the people who created the map. And I think what this illustrates is how subjective these documents are. They show you what the map maker thought was significant. And in each town, that would have been different. In this town, it was the Sobel Mechanical Works. The shtetl economy revolved around Market Day, an open-air bazaar held once or twice a week that brought Gentile farmers together with Jewish townspeople in a day of buying and selling. Farmers sold their crops and their livestock to the Jews, while townspeople supplied farmers with whatever they couldn't grow. And that included everything: clothing, boots, shoes, hats, kerosene, salt, even rosaries. There were Jewish rosary makers. On Market Day, normally quiet towns roared to life. Markets that were usually empty were now filled to capacity with both Jews and peasants, all in different dress, speaking different languages, shouting their wares, and bargaining at top volume. The competition was fierce because every sale mattered. Shtetls had their elites. These were Jews who enjoyed some degree of financial stability. For everyone else, the money earned on Market Day is what supported families for the rest of the week. Poverty was one of the factors behind the provisional quality of shtetl life. The other was persecution. For a Jew, a mostly hated minority, you never knew when a young anti-Semite would pick up a stone and throw it in your direction. Or worse, when the local priest would start a rumor that a Jew had killed a Christian child. This was the kind of talk that led to pogroms. These were mob attacks, semi-organized mob attacks against Jewish businesses and against the Jews themselves, often with deadly outcomes. Gray, oppressive, precarious. These are some of the words used by Yizkor book writers to describe shtetl life. What they also describe, however, are the ways shtetl Jews found to tolerate what was often a bleak existence and even transcend it. And that's what I'd like to focus on now. Storytelling in the shtetl was enjoyed by men and women, young and old, distinguished rabbis, and humble tradespeople. In other words, everyone. Stories were told at home and at work, in schools, taverns, and in the shtetls, bet midrash, or study house. Every shtetl had a study house, a one-room building filled with these long tables and then long wooden benches. It was open day and night. The study house was where men went to pray and read Torah, but which also served other functions. In a part of the world where winters were cold and dark, the study house was bright and warm, heat provided by a huge masonry stove that took up nearly an entire wall. The area in front of the stove was where stories were told. Prime time for storytelling was late afternoon, early twilight. As the sun set on another day, a well-told tale had the power to fend off melancholy. Or, It could mirror the feelings of despair that everyone experiences, or in the hands of a truly gifted narrator, it could do both. The home was another storytelling hub, this one for women. In winter, neighbors gathered in each other's kitchens to help with jobs that required many set of hands, like grating potatoes for Hanukkah latkes or plucking feathers for bedding, goose feathers for the rich, chicken feathers for the poor. To pass the time while they worked, the women told stories, many involving supernatural beings like demons that could turn themselves into goats, or spirits that prayed at night in the local synagogue. After the war, this huge body of folklore, passed down orally from one generation to the next, was now at risk of being lost. Yizkor book authors, who saw these stories as their cultural inheritance, would prevent that by committing them to writing. Oh, I wanted to say something about this photo. It's because, not so much for the people, but for the stove. I don't know if you can make it out, but you see the stove is not an appliance. It's part of the home. It's part of the structure of the home, and it's a structure with multi platforms. And if you notice that it's got a sort of flat top, and on really cold winter nights, you could sleep on top of the stove. Later, when these towns were under German occupation, stoves became really important hiding places. So something to know about shtetl stoves. The stories recorded in Yizkor books are typically grouped together under the heading folklore. How shtetl Jews came to see themselves as producers of a folk culture is a story that I do tell in the book. It's a little involved, so I can't go into it right now, but know that many Yizkor books have these folklore sections, collections of stories, superstitions, jokes, nicknames, and witty or clever sayings. And I've collected a few of those sayings, which I'd like to read to you. Okay, you can tell me if they're witty or clever. It fits like a hunchback fits a wall. It doesn't fit. Good Shabbos, goat. What are you doing here? A kosher pot, a kosher spoon. Everything is in order. And this one I think is quite well known. Didn't climb, didn't fly. And in Yiddish, that would be nicht gesteugen, nicht geflogen, and it means not believable. There's a metaphor often referenced in Yizkor books that compares this world, our material world, to the world of the here and now, to a vestibule. There's a door in this vestibule, and on the other side of the door, a brightly lit banquet room, also known as the world to come. The vestibule is where we have to wait until the Messiah comes. And when he does, the door will swing open and the banquet will begin. On the Sabbath, it was thought that that door was cracked just wide enough to let out a sliver of light. Shtetl Jews basked in its radiance. On Friday afternoons, Jews who worked feverishly all week took off their aprons, put down their tools, and closed their shops. Women did their Sabbath bathing on Thursday, the day before, so now, Friday afternoon, it was the men's turn to visit the bathhouse and wash away the grayness of the work week. Everyone, including children, changed into their Sabbath best. Women lit Sabbath candles, which you could see from the street, flickering in every window of every house. After 6 days of work and worry, calm settled over the shtetl, enveloping everything and everyone. During the work week, shtetl dwellers subsisted on a diet made up mostly of starch, black bread, porridge, and potatoes, the mundane foods of the here and now. Sabbath foods were considered a preview of the menu waiting in the world to come. So that would be the world on the other side of the door. Taken as a group, Sabbath foods shared certain characteristics. Challah, gefilte fish, tzimis, which roasted carrots with honey and often with prunes. These were all foods that brought sweetness to the Sabbath table, both metaphorical and the kind you can taste. However, what people craved most was fat. So, for example, there was stuffed derma. Is anyone familiar with stuffed derma? So it's kishka, cow intestine, stuffed with then of flour and chicken fat. It's an acquired taste. Then there was chopped liver, enriched by onions, which had been fried in chicken fat, and kugel, a kind of casserole made with grated potatoes, onions, and yet more chicken fat, all baked in the oven until the top is crispy and brown and the interior is soft and luscious. Yizkor books have a lot to say on the subject of kugel, both the actual food and what it symbolized. So here's an example. The kugel played a great role in the life of the Jews. No wonder there were so many proverbs about the kugel. When the kugel was not so successful, it was said, "We rejoiced with him like a bad kugel." Another expression, "If you do not eat kugel for Shabbos, you will go hungry all week." Every story that was told had to have the following epilogue. Though they have it good, we have it even better. They eat kugel with their hands. We eat kugel with the tip of the knife. Kugel was the expression of the greatest well-being. If you said of someone that he eats kugel in the middle of the week, you are saying that things could not be better for him. So, it only makes sense that a culture which equates foods like kugel with the greatest well-being would also provide cures for indigestion. To help the food go down in peace, Sabbath lunch was followed by a trip to the seltzer stand, which in turn was followed by a Sabbath nap. Rested and refreshed, now it was time to go strolling. A leisurely Sabbath stroll was a tradition enjoyed by people of all social ranks. The community's most respected citizens, the town rabbis, might go strolling together in their best silk coats. Married couples strolled up and down the shtetls' main streets, cracking sunflower seeds between their teeth as they walked. Young people strolled beyond town into the surrounding fields and forests. Being the Sabbath, they took time as they walked to admire the beauty of God's creation. However, they also admired each other. Though unmarried men and women often strolled in groups, occasionally a couple would peel off into the trees for a few minutes of privacy, a precious commodity in towns where everybody knew everybody's business. During the interwar years, so that would be the 20s and 30s, young people with the same political loyalties tended to stroll together. One of these young people was my great uncle, Nathan. Like other 20-somethings, my uncle had rejected traditional Judaism with its 613 laws. So far as he could see, religious observance had done nothing for the Jews. If Jews wanted redemption, if they wanted a place at the banquet table, they would have to fight for it, which is why he signed on with a group called Betar. It was a right-wing sort of paramilitary Zionist group in which he was a Zionist commander. And these photographs are from different Yizkor books, but it shows you some of the youth groups. Top row center is a Betar group, and you can see by their uniforms that there is a kind of militaristic feeling about them. This group down here, lower row right, is a much more progressive Zionist group called Hashamir Hatzair. And there's also, I think it's that, to the left, a kind of sports group. So there were all kinds of youth organizations. Betar was just one of the many Jewish youth movements, each with its own vision of the future. Even in a town like Lubamo, with its roughly 4,000 Jews, you would have found Zionists of every ideological flavor. You had your Marxists, your centrists, your religious, your revisionist, along with anti-Zionists like the Bund, which was a communist workers' party that supported a home for the Jews in Eastern Europe. Whatever their beliefs, Saturday afternoons, the men and women who belonged to these groups took afternoon strolls into nature. When it started getting dark, they lit campfires and formed circles, singing political anthems or practicing Israeli folk dances. Sabbath was a day of regeneration, both physical and spiritual. Strolling was a source of both. My grandmother, my 3 great uncles, my aunt, and my father were all born in Lubamo. So the little boy with the cap, that's my father. My grandmother is the top row in a white sweater. Nathan is one of the figures in there sitting next to his mail order bride, Dorothy, who was sent over from the US to help get him an American visa because that was the only way at that time to get into this country. My father, his sister, and mother emigrated to this country in the fall of 1938 on one of the last ships out of Poland. What they used to say in my family, and it was a phrase that really scared me as a kid, was they got out by the skin of their teeth. And these were very strange words to me, but I knew, I got the idea. Today, almost all of my Lubamo relatives are gone. However, there happens to be a longevity gene on that side of the family, so until fairly recently, my aunt and my father were still telling me Lubamo stories. And in fact, some of those stories I heard for the first time while I was writing this book. Last fall, I lost my aunt at 98 years old. The night of her funeral, my father had a dream. He dreamt that he was up in his apartment and that Luba, his sister, was downstairs in a cab waiting to take him to the airport. So I heard the stream, and I think the meaning is pretty clear. My father, the last of my Lubamo relatives, is ready to follow his sister. I tell this story because what's happening in my family is happening on a societal scale. The world is about to lose the last generation of shtetl Jews. Their stories, however, will survive, preserved through the medium of Yizkor books. Of course, stories preserved in writing are as good as lost if no one reads them, which means now the responsibility is ours. Thank you. So,
That was amazing, Jamie.
thank you.
That was powerful,
Try to get a little fun in.
Unforgettable, absolutely unforgettable. Really one of the most memorable talks we've ever had.
Oh my, thank you so much. Of course, yeah.
Wait for the mic to come around for questions.
That was wonderful, Jane. Thank you so much. And things that I didn't even know about, so I appreciate that. You had that large photograph at the banquet, and it said it took place in March of 1950,
Right.
and the banquet was the 50th anniversary.
Right.
So that Landsmannschaft, it must have existed just at the turn of the century.
Exactly.
And was that true for many other Landsmannschafts?
That's around the time that most of the Landsmannschaft were formed. So that makes entire sense in the timeline of Landsmannschaften. Yes. I mean, I don't know if, are you asking were other Landsmannschaft formed at that?
Right.
Yes,
Would they
that
be
was
that
exactly when. That was exactly when they began to come together to form these self-help groups.
Were the publishers predominantly in New York, Chicago, or were they scattered nationwide? Where did they physically emanate, the books?
You know, I'm trying to find out more about the publishers. My impression, you know, most of the Yizkor books were published in Tel Aviv.
Oh, okay. Not the New York Yiddish press.
The second was New York. And my impression is that Yizkor books were published by publishers who also published devotional books, as in prayer books. I mean, I've seen that examples of that once, and based on that, I'm generalizing, so I need to do a little bit more research on that.
But the heft of them and the gold embossing, right? It's got a devotional
That's right. Well, Yizkor books, they're interesting because they're kind of secular books and they're kind of sacred books. They fall into a kind of in-betweeny character, spot. And yeah, it's one of the sort of fascinating things to me about them is how to treat them as artifacts, what they mean as artifacts.
So my first question is, there was one of the illustrations towards the end of your talk was so beautifully rendered. It was art. And I wondered who that artist was. I don't know if you know, it was of a family kind of around the table with large rounded shapes.
Oh, that beautiful. I don't know. I'm sorry. I have to find out. That's all I can say.
But it was just, and I thought, well, I wondered if there were illustrations like that
no,
were
it's
common
somebody important. I just found it recently, and I didn't take good notes.
And my other question has to do with this film shtetl, and I wondered if you have seen it, because the picture of the market day that you showed seemed, I mean, it's a fantastic sort of 48 hours in the life of shtetl.
I think I've seen that one.
The Russians are there at that time, and it's
Is
about
that the movie? It's where shtetl is spelled without the E.
Yes.
Yeah, that's an amazing movie.
And I wondered about when you saw it and being so familiar with the Yizkor books, what you thought of that rendition.
Just FYI on that picture, that's Lubomel. That's the Lubomel market. So that's the town where my father's from. And one of the things that people always say about Market Day, it was loud. It was deafening. All the animals were making noises, and the people were screaming, and the bargaining. And I think that picture, you can sort of imagine how noisy it might have been.
Was there anything in Lubomov that struck you as different or unusual that stood out to you as opposed to the other Yizkor books that you looked at?
The Lubamol book?
Yeah. And two-part. And then the other thing I want to know is, do you know anything about the composition? You had mentioned early the composition of these books was often fraught. And do you know anything about the composition of your town?
Yeah, well, I happen to have, so that guy, Nathan Sobel, who drew the map, he was also instrumental in making the Yizkor book happen. And I have some of his memos that were on file at YIVO of what he wanted in the Yizkor book. And he wrote a kind of outline. I want this kind of document. I want that kind of document. So what was your question exactly, Kenny? So,
Well, just if you knew any
is the composition
stories about the composition, because you had mentioned a lot of times there was contention over the composition of the books. And then I had
well, here's like one point of contention that I read about that I know happened. Should we talk about public history, like the public life of the shtetl, or should we talk about our families? Which is more appropriate? So those kinds of, that would have been a policy debate. The Lubamol Yizkor book is special because it's my Yizkor book. And I don't know any other Yizkor book with the same kind of thoroughness. I also haven't seen Yizkor books with those two covers, with the double covers. So that was a little innovation that someone came up with. There's a lot of similarities when you looking across Yizkor books, doing a cross-section, but each one is different.
Hi, Jane. That was wonderful and amazing. I am interested in looking into a Yizkor book from my mother's town in Essen, Germany, and I Googled it, and one exists. Did you say that this was translated, the one from Lubamol?
Yeah, so there's a very large translation effort taking place right now by the people who run Jewish Gen. Jewish Gen is a Jewish genealogical website. That's how it started. It's sort of branching out more into, it's becoming more inclusive about Jewish history in Eastern Europe. And if you go to their website, jewishgen.com, look for your town and see if a translation has been started. Okay. I can help you with that.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, this was great.
Thanks, Susan.
I have a Yizkor book because my father was from Kamenetsk-Podolsk, that area in Czechoslovakia. And he never told me what happened to his family. Right. I don't think he even knew what happened to his family because he and his brothers escaped, the family, they escaped to Budapest. But in the Yizkor book, I think there's a list of the people that went to Auschwitz, and it lists his whole family, but that's not exactly correct because his brother and him escaped. So I don't even know how their names got in there. There's a whole bunch of people in there with, the same last name, but I don't even know how the names got in there. How would it?
Okay, so
neighbors?
Here's something that's really important about Yizkor books. Every Yizkor book has something called a necrology. Necrology is a list of the dead, and it's names of people who were killed during the war. And that list was compiled just by fellow townspeople writing into the Yizkor book committee. Oh, my cousin Moshe died, my other aunt, Suri died. And sometimes they got things wrong, but it was very important. Getting that list right. There was a lot of hair tearing about getting it right, because if you left someone out, they weren't buried. You were consigning them to oblivion. You had to have their name in the book. You had to have them remembered. That's, the book can be a tombstone. So that's where the names are inscribed, is in this part of the book called the necrology. So maybe they got something wrong.
Yeah, I don't know, because my father, he escaped, and he ended up in Israel with the Kastner train. I don't know if you know about the Kastner train, but he never really knew what happened to his family. I think I'm the one who found this book, by Googling some other name that he mentioned, and I'm the one who actually told him, this is what happened to your family.
Same with me.
Incredible.
I found out what happened to my family in this Yizkor book.
Yeah, it's just incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you. This was very
That's
interesting.
what they do.
Thanks, Jane. In the Yizkor books, were there recipes, and then were there? Did you compare at all? Were there wide variations? And of course,
there weren't tons of recipes. There were recipes. There was, almost all of the food-related stuff was about Shabbos food or Sabbath foods, and there was a lot about kugel. The way they made it sound is that kugel was deep in the psyche of the shtetl Jew in a way that other foods weren't, and it's given me a new appreciation for kugel. So.
You speak of the Yizkor books in Yiddish and Eastern Europe. Was there a tradition of creating these books for Central Europe, places where Yiddish was not the prime language, Bohemia, Moravia, which I'm interested in, and other places like Germany?
There are Yizkor books outside of Eastern Europe, but Eastern Europe was the core. That's where it was happening. There are French Yizkor books, there are German Yizkor books. So yes, it happened, but I don't think with the same frequency.
guess why?
Can I guess why? Not right this second, I can't, but I can think about it.
You reminded me when you said that of a song that I learned when I was growing up. The words were, Sunday potatoes, Monday potatoes. You go through the week.
Tuesday
Shabbos,
potatoes.
something special, potato pudding.
That's right. Mantik bulbis, Dreistig bulbis. I know that song, yeah.
Where are the big collections? So Dorot has them? Yivo has them? Who else?
NYPL. They have the biggest collection in the U.S., and I believe the biggest collection in the world is Yad Vashem.
Oh, and not Yiddish Book Center in Massachusetts quite as much?
They have some, but I don't think it's as expansive as NYPL.
We think of the shtetls of Jews. Who else was there? What would be the percentage difference in the population besides the Jewish population?
So I don't know if you notice, Andy, is it possible to go back to the map, or it's too hard? Because in the map, you'll notice, do you notice any churches? Yeah, so the shtetls were mixed communities, and the proportion of Jew to Gentile was different in every shtetl. Lubamel was 90% Jewish, so that was a really high Jewish percentage. I think that in most towns, Jews were the dominant group, and it was also the shtetl ran according to the Jewish calendar. Like on Saturdays, business was closed. It moved to the rhythm of the Jewish holidays and to Jewish observance. And a lot of the Gentiles spoke Yiddish, and vice versa, the Jews spoke Polish or Ukrainian.
Has there been thought given to, or has there ever been an exhibition such as with open pages of Yizkor books from different places? And is that something that is
You should talk to
in the
Eve.
offing?
Yeah. I don't know. I've never seen that, but these guys do that. Yeah.
Oh, hi. This has been such an amazing talk. Did any shtetls have more than one Yizkor book? Like, is there ever, or is it one per shtetl?
It's one per shtetl, and sometimes if they were just little communities, more like, a shtetl is a town, a dorf is a village. So they couldn't have, they didn't have the wherewithal to produce their own Yizkor book. So a bunch of little villages might have banded together to form like a kind of area, of a Yizkor book for towns in that area.
Hi. When someone like your uncle broke with tradition, would he stay at home in the shtetl or would he go somewhere else?
Could you say that one more time?
Sure. You mentioned that your uncle broke with tradition.
Yeah.
And would he have stayed at home or would he have gone somewhere else? Would he have been welcome in the shtetl?
Well, you mean gone somewhere else, like to another town or a city? So to be in Betar, which was this group he was in, you had to go to a special school, and that was near Warsaw. It was a commander's school. You had to kind of learn how to be a soldier. And to learn, the guy who was the head of this Betar was this guy named Jabotinsky. And yeah, that's maybe a familiar name. And he had a very particular vision of what Jews should be. So you had to kind of swallow the Jabotinsky line and become, a kind of convert. So he did spend time there, but there weren't really places to go. I mean, the place to go was to America, and that's where he eventually went. Oh, okay. One more, please. Maybe there isn't one more.
I'll do one more.
Okay.
This was magic, Jane. Absolute magic. You had this whole crowd. It's packed and everybody was riveted. I just want to thank you. And her book is for sale and signing this evening. And supplies are running out in the back. So run, don't walk. Thank you, Jane. That was awesome.
Thank you.